The Legal Mindset Corner will begin after a brief word from today's sponsor, Answering Legal. Visit answeringlegal.com to learn more about our 24/7 virtual receptionist team.
I've been utilizing Answering Legal for my firm since 2015, and truth be told, it was a game changer for me. I can be anywhere, and I'm getting my phones answered by Answering Legal. A strategic partner, as I call Answering Legal, provides a great reward. What is that reward? It's time. Time for whatever I want to do. As a private practitioner, I would highly recommend Answering Legal to other private practitioners. Now, every call goes answered.
Welcome back to the Legal Mindset Corner, sponsored by our friends at Answering Legal. Now, my co-host, Becky Howlett, and I, Cynthia Sharp, are devoted to exploring a range of topics that impact lawyer well-being. That includes mindfulness, work-life integration, digital communication, resilience, healthy communication, and more. Well, today we are privileged to have with us Marc Hoag, who is here to discuss the hottest topic in the universe, Chat GPT. Marc, thank you so much for joining us. And, I just love it if you would give our viewers a brief introduction of yourself. Tell us what you're doing now and how you got to this point in your career.
Yeah, first, thank you both for inviting me to join this. I guess it's technically whatever is the opposite of penultimate. It's the second, I guess, in your inaugural series of podcasts. I don't know the opposite of penultimate. But in any event, really exciting to be here. Yes, my background is primarily, I've been a tech founder here in San Francisco for many years. And as almost cliche as it's starting to sound, I think I've fallen down the rabbit hole of all things AI, like all of us. So I've decided to finally go back and launch my own law practice, doing a focus on AI law specifically, because of course. So it's just a super exciting time to get involved with this. I actually think, hyperbole aside, this is definitively, unambiguously the greatest advancement in civilization ever, by far, period.
More so than fire. We're going there.
Look, that's a good point. It actually might be funny. No, it's funny. So this is actually great that you said that. So when I started doing my podcast 4 years ago on autonomous vehicles, I met up with a buddy of mine who was one of the earliest pioneers in autonomous vehicle technology. And I made the claim to him then that I thought, well, autonomous vehicles were the greatest step change in humanity since the Industrial Revolution and blah, blah, blah. And I still stand by that claim in a very practical kind of way. It's going to really impact things profoundly, except for that ever receding timeline. But he kind of paused and he looked at me and he was like, really, Marc? Really? Even more than AI? Even more than AI? I'm like, well, I'm talking about like the practical sort of end user case, right? Mind you, this was, I don't know, 3 years ago, give or take, 4 years ago, maybe more. And that was his point. Now here we are. And well, rather unsurprisingly to his credit, he's right. AI is indeed the thing of all things.
And it's evolving ever so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we've all seen the crazy metrics, right? So what was it? 100 million users took 2 months. TikTok took 9 months. It's obviously Microsoft jumped on board with the $10 billion play to bundle in Chat GPT with what Microsoft are doing now. And they're basically rebooting themselves as an AI OS is where things are headed, it looks like, by integrating everything with the Windows OS going forward. Sort of a funny replay if you think back to the late 90s when they bundled Internet Explorer with Windows. I wonder how this is going to play out now with AI. But we've never seen anything like this, right? This is totally, totally unprecedented territory in terms of content, reach, and speed.
Right. And Marc, you're an attorney. Obviously, our audience here are lawyers, a lot of solo and small firm practitioners. So let's tie the AI into the legal field. Why should attorneys care about this?
So I'm starting to go on the record as much as I can saying that I guess you could use the word attorney or law practice, really as a proxy for any company, any business, any profession that does not embrace AI in some capacity will be dead or dying in the next 2 to 3 years. So I guess a good way to look at it, and by the way, just a perhaps unnecessary disclaimer here, this stuff is so new that, unless you're an actual engineer working on this tech, then everything that anybody is going to be sharing, whether it's me or other attorneys or anyone else, this is all kind of what we're learning as fast as we can. This is just aggregated the top, cream of the cream sort of knowledge base that we can get, because in about 2.7 seconds, probably what we're discussing is going to be stale anyway. So, but the general idea is that the idea not to embrace AI today is as absurdly foolish as if one were to say, hey, this internet thing, how important is it to get on there? I mean, but it's like even more beyond that, right? Because now you're talking about, how did I phrase it the other day? It's I got to give it a thought. Something occurred to me, but basically this is literally it's like a force multiplier of humans.
And I know, Cindy, you have said that there are, because I have raised that as well. I'm like, well, what attorney isn't using email? And Cynthia Sharp apparently knows of, I don't know, in person she knows these people, but there are apparently lawyers who did not ever embrace the World Wide Web. I know that seems almost unfathomable.
And they carry around a really awesome leather suitcase, and that's super cool. And they write with a fountain pen, which I have but forgot how to use. That's awesome. And that's great. Look, there's always going to be outliers, right? There's always going to be folks who kind of do what works, because why not? And I think in some use cases that probably makes sense. I mean, if it's optimized and it works, then go for it. But I think, so what? These are outliers, and the important thing is, how do you stay ahead, or how do you get ahead? Or indeed, if you're a new lawyer or a new anything in any profession, how do you make sure you come out on top? One of the big concerns has been, if you just flip by analogy to tech generally, right? It's sort of like, oh, are we going to lose coding jobs? Everybody's going to school to be a coder or a developer. And well, the answer is no. This is probably the best time in the last 15 or 20 years to go into tech and coding, precisely because of AI. Again, it's not necessarily that AI is going to remove it's not that AI is going to cause people to lose jobs. It's not going to take jobs away, but rather it will take away jobs from people who do not use AI.
So I did a little research this weekend just to see, are there any employers putting out ads that say you need to be conversant in AI? And indeed there are. And so I frankly, I didn't look specifically in the legal field, but there are in just the general business field. So do you think that that being conversant with like how to use prompts most effectively, do you think that will really enhance somebody's marketability?
Yeah, I do. For a couple of reasons. First, I'm sort of thinking out loud here, but first of all, prompt engineering is the somewhat cool label that's been assigned this skill set. Prompt engineering is actually a pretty tricky thing to get right. It's it's deceptively simple to get started, but it's remarkably complex to get right and indeed to master. There was a really funny thing. I don't know if you both saw it a few days ago. There was a lawyer in a case against a South American airline company from a really big reputable law firm. Yeah. And it turned out that all of his case citations were totally bogus.
Well, I saw that from your newsletter, which I just have to tell our audience, definitely go. No, this is shameless promotion. I have been using your newsletter every single day. So definitely to all our audience members. So just by way of background, we met Marc when Cindy and I were giving our first CLE on Chat GPT, which we had well over 200 people in the audience, and Marc was there. It was like rapid fire questions. I think by far that was the most active chat we've ever seen, and some of the audience has ever seen.
Didn't somebody ask if I was an AI? And I think I said yes.
Yes, and And thank goodness for Marc's presence, because he was such an asset in that session, answering, because he could speak to all the technical points, which, as we're talking about, it's so funny because that presentation is now hilariously outdated. But I just wanted to give a shout out because that's how we met Marc. And I've now been following his newsletter, which covers AI, autonomous vehicles, and climate change. And it's called Future Perfect. Definitely subscribe. But I saw that via your newsletter. Like, Marc, your newsletter keeps me more informed than even following all the major news outlets. So thank you for putting that together.
Thank you. That's awesome of you to say. Thanks very much. I mean, look, there's obviously a very self-serving benefit here, right? It's a great way, to the point you just reiterated, how fast things are going. It's a pretty great way to keep myself in the loop, right? I mean, so there is that. So thank you again for sharing that. I appreciate it very much.
And this attorney this was not a newbie. This guy had been in practice for 30 years, and yes. And so, basically his defense was, he's already confessed to violation of what comment 8 of 1.1 that says that you must be competent and know the reasonable benefits of technology. So he certainly failed there. And June 8th is the sanction hearing, is the hearing to see if there's going to be sanctions. Yeah.
Well, so I want to ask a question about this and query Marc on this, because this came, to your point, this is just, the advancements are so rapid, the change is just minute by minute. And we were asked in that CLE, could an attorney who's not utilizing AI then be in violation of our professional rules of ethics? I want to pitch that question to you, Marc.
Yeah, and just to make sure I understand the nature of the question, right? You're suggesting like it could be almost like a necessary thing that is utilized, otherwise it's almost incompetence not to use it, right?
I think that's exactly what the attorney was getting at, yes.
Yeah, so I remember that question quite well, and it's a really, really awesome point. Before I even venture a guess as to how this could play out, look, in the long term, yes, absolutely, no question. In the short term, I honestly don't know how it's going to play out. Again, nobody really knows. But it does remind me of a really funny thing that occurred. I don't know if I mentioned this to the two of you previously, but it's worth mentioning here quickly. My first MCLE that I attended after law school, there was a big discussion about the ethics around using a cloud service like Dropbox or something, right? And I very arrogantly finally just kind of chipped in, and I was like, hey, are you seriously suggesting that it's not safe to use a 256-bit bank-level encrypted service versus carrying around papers in a folder? I mean, come on. That wasn't even a question, guys. So obviously, in retrospect, that was indeed pretty, amateur hour of me. But I think the point is well taken, because obviously, certainly we've accepted these technologies as being not only adequate, but indeed necessary. So I have no doubt that's where it's going to head. I think right now the issue is going to be Chat GPT and other generative AI, as they're known. They're definitely tools, and I think it's probably going to play out as basically either don't use them if you're not qualified to use them, if you haven't properly been trained on them. Alternatively, if you have been trained, then absolutely you should make good use of them. I mean, because at the end of the day, it just comes down to, can you imagine a lawyer not being allowed to use Westlaw or Lexis, right? I mean, that just wouldn't happen.
Or in the social media realm, I followed the whole development of social media in the legal world. And in the very beginning, I'll never forget the first case I saw. It was a Western District of Colorado case. Oh my gosh, they admitted something from social media into evidence. And now then if you look at the other side of the coin, is that now if an attorney is not using social media in terms of discovery, I know there was one matter that I read about where the attorney had not even looked at their own client's Facebook page. And the client had like either a workers' comp or an injury case, and they were out there, surfing, and maybe not quite that extreme. And if the attorney had only looked at their own client's Facebook page, they would have known it. And what the court said was, you should be roundly embarrassed. And so I think I could take what you're saying even a step further is to say you really need to be using AI and you really need to be trained on it, because it's a tool, and you're gonna put yourself out of the marketplace because clients are out there using it right now, and they're going to ask the attorney, are you using AI? Are you taking advantage of it? And so if you have any reaction to that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I think the problem with AI in its present form, again, these are the so-called LLMs, not that kind, obviously, but large language models, and it's really neat. I don't know how much of a deep dive you've tried to take and really understanding at a very low level how these things work. But suffice to say, for any listeners who may not be sure, they really are, for lack of a better term, probability engines. They've been fed all this data, something like 1 trillion data bits now from all, not bits as in actual data size, but 1 trillion parameters, say, of data. Basically, they've been force-fed the entire contents of the internet. And they just probabilistically determine, they kind of work out what's likely to follow next. So a great analogy I heard is, if you see a sentence, the cat sits on the. Okay, well, probably there's a pretty small subset of words that could follow from that sentence clause. So it's going to go with what is best. Right. And actually you can, I thought of a funny thing to do once. You can sort of force what I'm calling a Chat GPT verbose mode. You can force it to output its probabilities after every word. So,
really?
Yeah, you just tell it to do so. You just say something like, hey, put a parenthetical after every word with a percentage of your certainty of that word. I think it spits out some disclaimer, sort of like, hey, these are not real-time probabilities. These are kind of aggregate from blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it's a neat sort of, it's some insight anyway. In retrospect, I should have probably asked it to carry its percentage, I don't know, 10 decimal places out, because everything's like 99 or 100, obviously, which is a bit silly in retrospect. But yeah, so my point is simply that it's really important to understand how these things work. The reason, the issue being that, and this was especially true with the initial rollout of GPT, which is 3.5, and I think this is fairly common knowledge now to everyone, but just in case, the issue is that 3.5, the initial free version, it could do a lot of so-called hallucinating, right? So it could produce a lot of great content, which totally seemed accurate and absolutely spot on. And you'd have to be a super expert in the field to even notice that there was something off. The later version 4, that you have to pay $20 a month for, it's a lot better. But in a sense, that kind of makes it even more dangerous, because now it's even harder to recognize when there's something off. To use an autonomous vehicle analogy, actually, I said this about Tesla a long time ago. It's so good that it actually makes it more likely for you to be careless or fall asleep at the wheel. It may not kill you if you fall asleep at the wheel, but you increase your risk profile, ironically. So it's critically important to be trained in terms of how to use it and to understand its shortcomings.
Well, and
absolutely.
The attorney who's got himself into some hot water by just relying totally on Chat GPT. One of his defenses was, well, I asked the question of Chat GPT, are these accurate citations? And it said yes. So I don't think it's going to work as a defense. And I feel for the guy. But
no, this seems to me the sort of thing where he either, he should have known. He should have known its limitations. I hate to use such a throwaway argument, but right, this is sort of what it comes down to, I think. I think, but that's a tricky argument too, right? Because you look at 200 million, 300, whatever it's up to now, million users around the world using it. I don't think it's fair to say that most people using it should know such limitations to such a degree. I don't think that's fair to say.
But we're attorneys.
But I do think that I'm going to hold an attorney to a higher standard, frankly. I'm going to say that, look, if you're going to use this, you probably should know, or if you don't know, if it doesn't even occur to you, probably actually do a little more homework on it first. Recognize the tremendously novel thing that this is, and sort of be a bit dubious. Is this really possible? Is this really right?
In the beginning stages. This has just been out. November 2022 was when the Chat GPT, 3.0 was released.
November
And
30.
then it
Yep,
was
November 30.
February
Exactly.
that it
Yep.
went up to 4.0. And so, we're in a society that we expect everything to happen so quickly, happen now, be perfect, that this has happened so quickly. And I'm looking at it, the way we use it is as an idea generator, as opposed to not relying on it. I know Becky and I are very, we're authors. And so we have pride of authorship. And when this came out, and I mean, I've been obsessed with it. We talked about that, we're not plagiarists. But what do you think? What do you think about attorneys plagiarizing in their briefs?
Unless I'm mistaken, this is an almost impossible question to answer at the moment. Nobody really knows. Here's why. And by the way, if somebody does know, hey, please reach out and educate me, because this is kind of like the meat of what's going on, and like this is what's so cool, and why indeed I really want to get involved in this, and much more so than I have been. And here's the issue, right? So all this training data is literally everything that was in the internet, right? And a lot of that was proprietary, copyrighted information. So if you're producing output, which is admittedly novel content, but it's coming from that formerly copyrighted info, let's say, what's the new product? Well, how much is it pulling from that copyrighted info? Well, obviously it's pretty trivial. And in any event, to the extent that it does, what it's outputting and reproducing as new content is decidedly new and not previously generated stuff. It's completely new. And then there's the question of, what do you as a human do to that thing? Do you sort of wrap it up and put a pretty bow on it and sort of add artistic or other objective qualities to it? Then surely it's new content. So is it plagiarism? It doesn't seem like it's going in that direction. And frankly, I'll put myself out there and say, I don't think it should ever go in that direction. I think that would be a completely terrible, terrible argument, technically as well as policy-wise, to suggest that everything generated by an AI language model is somehow plagiarizing, I think is just completely, what shall I say, grotesquely misinterpreting how an LLM works. So I think that would be a mistake. Again, I think it'd be a policy failure. In fact, by the way, just a quick aside, not to go down this path unless you really want to, my biggest concern actually is AI being pulled out from underneath us. I could totally imagine. In fact, I'd be very pleasantly surprised if governments around the world, including and especially the US, frankly, start to do what Italy had done initially, is to just disallow it for public use, at least during these early stages. I mean, as analogies have been flying lately, it's sort of like we're allowing public above ground nuclear testing. It's like flying a passenger plane full of passengers when it's still being doing test flights. Today, I think it was China just flew their first commercial home-built commercial jet plane. I think it's called the Copac C919. It's sort of a 737 or A320 class long to medium range passenger jet, right? So it just did its first commercial flight, but you can be sure they never flew passengers when they were testing it. And that's kind of what's going on now. And so that's my fear, is that if we have this all ripped out away from us prematurely, that's, to me, that would be a tragic loss actually for society.
Well, and my understanding is that for now, we've got the long-term implications and the short-term implications. And, in the short term, it's the bias and misinformation that's given out. But then we've got all of these the long-term things that it's happening so quickly, much quicker than social media, than the advent of social media.
It's literally double exponential, right? Because you've got both the foundational technology, which is improving at a faster rate, but then unlike any other thing in human history, you've got the technology, which is itself improving itself. So it's literally a double exponential curve. In fact, just to give you a really hard metric on this, the general consensus of all the top AI researchers was that we would so there's 2 points I want to just draw attention to, that we would maybe reach this level of capability at least 3 to 4 years from now. Mm-hmm. And the second assumption that's been pretty much accepted throughout the entire realm of academia, going back decades of AI research, is that the first form of AI would be sort of industrial robots. And then we would have many decades hence sort of very high level, not particularly advanced cognitive type reasoning. And eventually, much further down the timeline, we'd end up with very low level, superhuman cognitive reasoning. And lo and behold, we've seen the exact opposite to this. So from two really important metrics, right? All the researchers were wrong. And the reason they were wrong is because AI is itself effectively self-learning both things and at speeds that was never anticipated, nor can anybody explain how.
Right. And one thing I know we've talked about this in other conversations, Marc, is I can't think of a comparable industry where the leaders in that industry are asking, and not even asking, begging governments to come up with a regulatory scheme. It's normally the opposite, right? We got lobbyists being like, please do not regulate us. Here we have the creators of Chat GPT, the founder of OpenAI, testifying in front of Congress and basically pleading with Congress, please, we need a regulatory scheme. We need safeguards. We need guardrails in place. Can you speak more to that? Because it's just really shows to me how unprecedented this is.
No, you're totally right. At least anecdotally, I literally actually cannot think of any instance where somebody has requested regulation. So that is already a pretty mind-blowing thing. The founder of OpenAI, Sam Altman, he used to run Y Combinator. It's arguably one of the most famous, largest kind of incubator type centers in Silicon Valley. So he's been around really cool startups his entire life, right? And the last thing that, to your point, a tech founder or anybody really wants is more regulation. The reason why he's so desperate to get it, and I don't know if you know this, he's currently doing a world tour. It's kind of neat on YouTube. You can grab kind of his latest countries talk wherever he goes, more or less.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and I mean, he and others. So he's one of the signatories for this big push right now. I think there's some 600 odd researchers and notable figures who are just begging for a 6-month pause on. Just to be clear, they're not asking for a pause on research, right? In fact, quite the contrary. By all means, keep the research going. They're asking for a pause on public deployment. And I think the reason why Sam is so outspoken about this is because, he's right there. He gets it. He sees what's going on. He understands he critically understands and is aware of what neither he nor anybody else knows. And he's aware of the dangers and the risks. So I suppose it's perhaps not so shocking that he would ask for regulation, because he knows that if they're doing this, other people and countries are doing this too, right? And so this is like, this takes the whole concept of a Pandora's box and it just ramps it up to 11. It's really potentially scary. I realized as soon as I tossed in that word scary, and I was about to bite my tongue and not use the word, but here we go. Everybody starts to say things like, oh, well, what are you saying? We're not going to have like a Terminator movie type thing or a HAL 9000 type thing. And, these robots, we're going to suddenly have killer robots in 5 years, right? And that's totally not what it's about. It has nothing to do with that sort of a risk. It's something much more subtle, which we can discuss if you want, but it's kind of a rabbit hole.
Well, and at some point, because you believe me, before we end this podcast, we are going to ask you to come back, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this interview, and perhaps we can dig a little deeper the next time. But all that being said, despite the scariness of it, I know I'm using it full force, and you most likely are too. So how are you using it, Marc? What do you do with Chat GPT?
A lot of things. For one thing, it's great for just random idea brainstorming. First and foremost, as a tech founder, I've always just been flooded with ideas. So it's great to kind of come up with ideas. It's really awesome for whipping together outlines of business plans and financial projections and this, that, the other. Obviously, it's pretty helpful for summarizing news articles for the newsletter, because, of course, I'm not going to just waste hours doing what can be, what I can get help doing. But actually, to the first point, but it's always critical to give it a second kind of pair of eyes and make sure it's done things correctly. it's really great for troubleshooting things. I find myself using Google a lot less whenever there's an issue I want to resolve or figure out. It's good for medical research, but again, with a huge footnote and the numerous disclaimers ad nauseum that Chat GPT throws in your face, again, some of these are really practical and don't really carry too much risk. Others, for instance, medical advice that can carry risk. So I think, like anything, there has to be some sense of reason when you use it. I think that's what's so amazing is the limits are pretty boundless, right? Oh, and the other cool use case is obviously artwork. So one of the really fun things, and totally just as a hobby type thing, is using ChatGPT to create prompts to drop into Midjourney to create artwork. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Oh, very cool. Oh, that is very cool. I had not thought about that use. That's pretty brilliant.
But what's interesting though is your comment about how we're using it. It sounds like such a fun, benign thing. It just kind of, and I agree with you. I mean, I've totally been obsessing over this forever. Again, trying to not go totally down the hole of safety issues now. I just want to briefly allude to it, which is the risks are that when you have a system, call it AI or otherwise, whatever it is, which is trying to grow and advance on its own, there's a risk where it can end up trying to hyper optimize for, say, just one variable to the detriment of all other variables. So a really somewhat seemingly silly example, an academic example, is, hey, if you have some computers who want to optimize for, say, longevity, they might think to themselves, that oxygen stuff, it's pretty corrosive. We should probably get rid of it. It's not like, oh, hey, we want to kill humans because humans suck and we hate humans. We humans didn't drive elephants to extinction because we don't like elephants. Or, we're not sending airplanes to go crash into Canadian geese. It just sort of happens as a matter of course because somebody wanted to make money off elephants' ivory, or because we happen to have airplane jetways that go over migrating geese pathways. And so that's kind of the idea with AI, right? Because everyone's sort of presupposing that you have to have like consciousness and you have to have machines. And that's just not true. There's a lot of intelligent life that doesn't have consciousness, and it also doesn't have machinery. So you don't need those two things in order to actually produce tremendous, tremendous harm. And in fact, the really alarming statistic that's being tossed around these days, I think it's something like, 70 or 80% of researchers today say that there's a 10% chance that human life could basically be wiped out by AI, actually.
Yeah.
10%? Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I have the same reaction when I hear that. I misspoke. I just found it here. 50%. Sorry, 50% of researchers are concerned that there's a 10% or greater chance that humans could go extinct from our ability to control AI.
10%.
Yeah.
That's quite statistically significant.
Yeah, you wouldn't get on an to run with the airplane analogies again, nobody would get on an airplane which had a 10% chance of crashing.
Right.
Yet we're continuing to use it, and we hope it still develops. And so in the legal setting, what can we tell our viewers out there? For now, what is the best way that they can safely use it in their law practice setting? Should we have it right? So, what do we do?
I mean, at a really high level, obviously it's pretty important to understand, as cliche as it sounds, all the terms and all the privacy notices for whatever service is being used, be it ChatGPT or otherwise. It's super important to understand where the data is being stored, what it's being used for, and so on and so forth, right? This is pretty mechanical type stuff. But at a much lower level, there's also the overarching question of what happens, say, whether it's in the EU or in the US, with respect to AI law generally. So without getting into it too much now, so what's really interesting is that the EU, perhaps unsurprisingly, given everything they did with GDPR, right, they've been fleshing out this pretty great framework. Well, pretty great. I guess it depends on your point of view. A pretty great framework. I mean, it is leading towards structure and regulation, which is good. So let's just leave it at that. I don't know how this is going to play out, but they've got sort of a 4-tier pyramid system with respect to AI regulation based on the potential risk to society generally, and it's defined pretty broadly across many different factors, whether it's practical, whether it's democracy as a whole, that sort of thing. Things like, for instance, social scoring or scanning people's faces, that kind of thing, obviously totally just prohibited on its face, pun not intended. Alternatively, code of conduct type stuff, trying to help prevent spam. Okay, there, AI is probably fine. So that's a pretty neat way of how things are going to play out. Here in the US, there's kind of no structure yet, really. There's a few suggestions at the federal level. There's a few suggestions through, across some states, but it's pretty wild, wild west. I mean, just that's how it is.
As I've looked at it as to what practice opportunities that this can bring to attorneys, because then attorneys are really going to have to advise their corporate clients, their business clients on AI policies. I know that I've advised my attorney coaching clients that they need to have AI policies written for their law firms. And of course, who's going to write them? Well, let's start with Chat GPT. So what other practical applications in the law firm? We've heard contract drafting, but how can we tell our viewers who are sitting there not having used it the best way to get started with it and the applications that they can expect to use for now until it gets a little bit more sophisticated?
Yeah. So, the good news is that the barrier to get started is remarkably low, for better or worse. It's super easy. Just in 30 seconds or so, you go create an account on OpenAI's website and off you go. I would say, certainly for the practice of law, but really for anything where accuracy matters, definitely drop the $20 a month to get access to ChatGPT Plus, which unlocks ChatGPT 4. To give you one meaningful metric, by the way, on the improvement between the two versions, ChatGPT 3.5, the free version, I believe it had a uniform bar exam passage rate of something like 10%. And version 4 is at 90%, 90.
Yeah, the 90 percentile. Yeah,
it's pretty astonishing. Yeah. So I would say, first of all, that if you're going to do it at all, make sure you use the Plus version with GPT-4. Then I would say probably, start using it to do things that you've actually already done, right? Do things that how the outcome should be. Kind of error check yourself, right? So one of the cool things about software code is it has error checking built in, right? So we humans don't really do that. Maybe actually do that here. Literally actually use it for things that you've done, things what the outcome should be. Test it, see how you get to the intended result or the expected result rather, and kind of go from there. Because this would be a really kind of powerful learning opportunity as well. And then again, for better or worse, there's really no bound to what you can use it for. But the challenge, the bounds are not what you can use it for. It's rather how you use it and then how you, again, self-check it for errors.
Yes. And can I just say, to bring it back to our previous point about the attorney who didn't check the citations, just used them carte blanche. As we were talking about, I was just thinking about, a supervisory attorney's duty, right? To me, that what he did seemed no different from he relied on, a junior attorney and associate attorney to do the research. And then he signed, the pleading and filed in the court and didn't check it. So to me, it seems like it was the exact same state of play. And, as we know, like the buck's going to stop with that attorney. But that's really helpful advice.
Yeah, no, it's true, actually. In fact, obviously, it doesn't require much of a mental leap to imagine at what point does AI end up sort of stepping into the realm of unauthorized practice of law, or indeed whether it ends up being authorized practice of law, right? Because at some point, it will be fully authorized. Why not? But for the moment, it certainly isn't. And so I think that's a pretty important thing to understand where that line is drawn, because again, at the end of the day, it's just a tool to do a thing by those who are authorized. And like any other tool, it has to be used properly and responsibly. The challenge here is to recognize that it's capable of seeming like it's doing its own thing perfectly. And that's what's so risky. You know what it is? It's kind of the manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where people think that they're super experts at a thing when they have a minimal amount of knowledge. And then they learn a bit more. They're like, oh, actually, I don't know much at all. And it's only once they get like 3 PhDs in the topic, they're like, oh, okay, now I'm actually an expert. This kind of puts everybody in that state of they've learned a little bit or maybe nothing even at all, but it seems like they have all the answers. So it's potentially very dangerous in that respect.
There's so many other cool things that it can be used in the legal setting other than actually the drafting and drafting complaints. I mean, just the administrative aspects of running a firm. Like law firms should have staff manuals. Do you have templates for your termination letter as required under 1.16? There's all kinds of things that in the law office setting that are pretty low risk that we can have them do.
Yeah.
And so marketing too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was just going to take the words out of my mouth. Exactly. So obviously, as I'm pivoting into doing my own law practice now on specifically AI law, obviously this is foremost on my mind. And this might sound sort of shooting myself in the foot, but transparently, it's a pretty valid statement, right? The question is, what are the actual work product type stuff that potential clients might actually need help with on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's kind of neat, right? Because Chat GPT is pretty cool at being able to kind of aggregate a whole list of potential use cases of actual client type questions, which is great because some of the things are fairly obvious, but other ones just aren't. And so it's a neat way to kind of structure, say, one's practice around the sorts of issues that would present from clients in this space, right? So there's that. Also, it's really great just for human interaction, meaning, say there's some sort of contentious email or negotiation back and forth. It's really great to just kind of get another angle or perspective on how to either interpret something you've received or how best to respond to something. And actually, another cool use case that I discovered was even just role playing. So one of the really cool things about ChatGPT is you can ask it to pretend to be a thing that it isn't. Well, that it isn't. You can ask it to be a thing that you want it to be. So it's really, really great at role playing use cases where like you have a client who's got a certain issue and you want to sort of practice bouncing ideas off of it. It's really powerful for that.
Well, do you have any closing pieces of advice that you'd like to give our viewers?
You know, if it sounds like I'm at all negative about this AI sort of revolution that we're living through, I hope it's clear that I'm not negative about it at all. On the contrary, I'm fully embracing it, and I really hope everybody does the same. So I guess my advice would be, and given what just happened with this attorney that we've been talking about in this airline case, right? You know, we are held to higher standards, especially in the actual practice of law, right? So I think it's super important that if nobody else, at least we demonstrate that we can use this new technology responsibly, because if we all just keep dropping the ball on this. So let me put it to you this way. I actually have a real dear friend from law school who actually does work. She practices law in California at a state level, and they are categorically disallowed from using ChatGPT in any capacity whatsoever. And I could see this happening. I wouldn't be surprised. I could imagine a day where the California bar says, hey, you know, actually, we're not going to let lawyers use ChatGPT. This could happen.
Malpractice carriers who are doing it, it's the carriers, some of them have developed emails they're sending out. And I think that the bigger firms are saying no ChatGPT. And, look, I don't think it should be used right now in actual lawyering, maybe as idea generation, but that's where I'm seeing it come out is. So.
Sure. And I think it's important for everyone to use it as best they can based on their experience level with it. I mean, the neat thing is that once you do learn how to sort of self-regulate, it's not rocket. I mean, it's not a mystery how to do it, right? I guess my point is simply, it's important that we don't all drop the ball and risk losing this as a valuable tool, because that would just be, yeah, that would be awful. I mean, I think the way I phrased it recently was, if the internet is the medium that we work in, and the computer is the tool we use, I think ChatGPT is sort of like this drip feed of knowledge that we can just tap into. It's so profoundly powerful. So I think we owe it to ourselves not to lose it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing these powerful viewpoints. And I'm sure that the next time that we talk, that it's going to be a whole other conversation.
I can imagine. It's super exciting, and obviously, thank you both very much for inviting me here to talk about it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much, Marc. Your insights are just so helpful. And again, shameless pitch. Subscribe to Marc's newsletter, Future Perfect, and just really great one-stop shop to help you stay on top of the latest news in the AI game. And if you haven't had a chance yet to explore the services offered by our friends at Answering Legal, now is the perfect time. And while you're at it, please check out our website at legalburnout.com. And this is Becky Howlett and Cynthia Sharp signing off with our guest, Marc Hoag. And until we meet again, please remember, just breathe.